All right, welcome back, biology class. Today we are going to be working on part 3 of Unit 6, Mendelian Genetics. So our learning target today is I can apply how Mendel used math to predict offspring traits by using Punnett squares. We'll get to the Punnett squares later. So I want you to try this bell work question. Why don't you look like 50% like your birth dad and 50% like your birth mom? Okay, let's move forward. All right, so genetics. Genetics is the study of how characteristics are inherited. Keep in mind that the environment plays a role as well. That is why outcomes don't always match our expectations. So really, to get a unique organism, we're taking all their genetics, their genes, plus the environment, and that's going to equal an organism. So let's look at some new genetic terms. First, heredity. Heredity is the passing on of traits to offspring, so from parents to children. Genetics is the study of heredity. We want to know, how do those traits get passed on from one generation to the next? Another genetic term, and this one you'll see a lot, is called allele or alleles. These are different versions of the same gene represented by a single letter. We use letters to represent alleles. Alleles are mostly dominant or recessive. What I mean by different versions of the gene, it'd be like if you had brown eyes versus blue eyes. Those would be two different alleles. Dominant is the gene which is always expressed, no matter what the other allele is. We represent this with an uppercase symbol. Recessive alleles, however, will be overshadowed in the presence of a dominant gene. Two copies, however, recessive allele must be present for the trait to show up. We represent this by using the lowercase symbol of the same letter we used for the dominant one. You'll see examples of this coming up. When we look at alleles, we'll see ones that are either homozygous or heterozygous. Homozygous literally means same seed. So that means both alleles would be the same. Either both are dominant or both are recessive. For example, they might be both big R, or both little r. Heterozygous literally means different seeds. So the alleles are different. One dominant, one recessive. So one big R, one little r, if we were going to use the letter R to represent our alleles. Loci. This is a place in your chromosome. Alleles are always on the same place on the same chromosome. Trait is how alleles show in your body. A mixture of genes and environment influences a trait. So here's what it might look like in a chromosome. So you can see here is an allele for blue eyes. Here's an allele for brown eyes. These chromosomes are the same. They have genes in the exact same locations, but they might have different alleles on the different chromosomes, whereas these two are the same and these two are the same. Heterozygous, homozygous, homozygous. Okay, so when we look at these things, you're going to see the words genotype and phenotype. A genotype is the genetic makeup of the genes. So these would be genotypes, the letter combinations, right? Big P, or big P, heterozygous, also heterozygous, or little p, homozygous recessive versus homozygous dominant. Phenotype is your physical characteristic, the expression of the gene, whether that's purple flowers on this plant or white flowers. A genome is a collection of all your genes, the complete recipe to make an organism like you be you. So here are some examples of like some descriptions of phenotypes. This is from the popular series Harry Potter. You can see that in these examples, people are describing themselves or describing other people they know based on physical features, like all of the Weasleys having red hair and freckles. Or I believe this is about Hagrid being a large, huge human being. Or what it is that Harry Potter looks like, or what Draco Malfoy looks like. So an example could be freckles. Here are two possible phenotypes that can be observed. Either a person has freckles, that's observable, or no freckles, also observable. And then you have a genotype to represent freckles. We know just from experimentation that Having freckles is a dominant trait, so we would represent that with an uppercase F. And no freckles is a recessive, so we would represent that with a lowercase f. Question, if we use F and F, what are the possible genotypes and phenotypes for each allele pair for freckles? So this brings us to a guy named Mendel. He was an Austrian monk who experimented a lot with pea plants, and he found out some very surprising things when he experimented with pea plants, and he ended up developing some laws of genetics that do apply to many organisms. So Mendel used pollen to fertilize selected pea plants. He ended up with pure homozygous plants that were dominant and recessive, so ones that were purple or white. The first generation of plants that he used in an experiment would be called the P generation, which means parental. And then they would be crossed together to create the second generation of plants, the F1 generation, which means family one. And when he did that, among the F1 generation, all plants had purple flowers. So when he took dominant purple plants and dominant white plants, he only got purple plants. Then Mendel crossed the F1 generation plants with each other because he knew they were all heterozygous. And then he produced the F2 generation, which is family 2 generation. Among the F2 generation, some of the plants had purple flowers, many of them. Like here, we can see 3 out of the 4, and some had white flowers. We want to explain and understand why, though. So here are some of his experiments that he did with different parts of pea plants. He looked at their shapes, their colors, flower colors, pod shapes, pod colors, those types of things. Here's some of the numbers he got, how many that were dominant, how many were recessive for each of these, and then his ratios. What do you notice is the overall ratio that continues to come up over and over again in these experiments? So yes, he noticed that the F2 generation always produced a 3-to-1 ratio where the dominant trait is present 3 times as often as the recessive trait. This is only true for simple dominant recessive traits, and we'll talk about types of traits that are simple dominant recessive versus more complex patterns later. In 1865, Mendel put his findings together into 3 laws and presented them to the Bruin Society for Natural History. They were called the Law of Dominance, the Law of Segregation, and the Law of Independent Assortment. Let's go through each law quickly. First, the Law of Dominance. This law states that each parent contributes only one factor or gene of each trait shown in the offspring. One gene will be dominant over the other. The second is the law of segregation. This law states that the 2 members of each pair of factors segregate from each other during gamete formation. This basically describes what happens during the process of meiosis. So if a parent has these 2 different genes to give, these 2 different alleles, a capital Y and a lowercase, which one that you get is going to be random as to which way it goes. And they're going to get separated, segregated. And then the last is the law of independent assortment. The alleles of different genes can go into different gametes randomly. And that wraps up Mendel's laws and wraps up the end of this presentation. And then you'll look at this EOC question for the day and answer that in the Ed puzzle. Thanks for watching and good luck with the Ed puzzle.